we had to write a narrative for school, and I'm going to read it on this channel. So, yeah, if I mess up, I'm sorry. One of the most recent dramatic events in my life is my best friend Jeremy Gold moving to Florida. I realize that the term best friend is used quite loosely among teenagers nowadays, just as the term I love you is used too often with no meaning among the rest of society. But Jeremy, in every definition of the word, was my dearest and best friend. He, in an essence, was my brother. I'm about to open up, which you'll find out soon enough rarely ever happens, about the last few days I was able to spend with him. In order for you to truly understand the situation from my standpoint, however, I think I should tell you how we met. Jeremy and I originally met in 6th grade in our homeroom, which also happened to be our science class. Should you ask him, he talked to me because, and I quote, based on who was answering questions and how they were answering them, I concluded that they were all idiots. Except for you and me, of course. Jeremy was always blunt and honest about things. One of the many things we had in common, I guess. At lunch, we sat together with our 2 friends, Martine Molina and Karina Meister. All of us became very close, and slowly we added 2 more people to the table. Sadie Shaheen and Josh Buskin were the last to be added, and the 6th of us were pretty much inseparable. As the years went by, Jeremy and I became closer, and both of us changed in a multitude of ways, but now it seems as though he has changed more in the short 3 months he's been gone than he did in the whole 3 years I'd known him. I could write an entire book of the times I've shared with that short, black-haired, blue-eyed kid, but as I had mentioned earlier, I'm focusing on our last few moments. The possibility of him moving was brought to our attention at the beginning of 8th grade, but at the time, that's all it was, a possibility. I don't think any of us really thought that much of it until the day he said it was a certainty. And even then, the thought was pushed as far back into all of our minds as we could get it. Jeremy, his twin sister, and their father were scheduled to move on June 4th, 2010, one day after the twins' birthday and only 4 days before mine. On June 3rd, their birthday, a party was thrown as a celebration of their birth and also mourning for their goodbyes. I remember in the beginning, the place was full of screaming and happiness. Everything was pleasant, and for the first time in a long time, I had almost forgotten what was to come. Almost, that is, until one person started crying. One person was all it took for almost every person there to shed insurmountable amounts of tears. It was the first day of summer. Next year we would all be freshmen, the year of beginnings. But now, nothing was on anyone's mind except for the end of long friendships. I could not take it sitting there watching so many people cry. I had found that no tears would come, for I had shed them all before that moment. So I slowly got up without a word and walked away, wanting so badly to scream, but not letting a sound escape my lips. I sat down at a bench in the front yard. It seemed as though the weather knew how distraught we truly were, for as the sobs grew louder, the sky grew darker, and soon, like our tears, the rain seemed to wash away any happiness left in this now dreary place. As the night went on, the sobs lightened. However, the mood did not, and one by one, everyone left. I woke up the next morning thinking of 2 things. 1, my 5 best friends and I were going to Cedar Point, and 2, that day would be the last I would see one of them. Through my morning routine, I was in a bit of a daze, thinking of all the things that would no longer happen. I could not get the image of the empty house out of my mind. The plain white walls, stripped of anything and everything that made it theirs, the empty closets, and the silence that seemed to echo throughout the house as I sat next to Jeremy crying and talking about what was to happen next. My daydream was then interrupted when I was told it was time to go. At that point, I took a deep breath and tried pushing those horrible thoughts far into my subconscious. When we first arrived at the park, time went by slowly, and it seemed as though everyone was cautious not to bring up the subject. But the longer we were there, the more we all seemed to forget and focus solely on the times at hand. One roller coaster after another. For the most part, we went on everything. The lines were long and the sun was beating down upon us, but from my standpoint, it was all worth it to spend time with Jeremy. As the day faded to night, there was nothing but happiness between us all, and an adrenaline high that we all seemed to share. But just as our fun had started, it seemed to also end, as we all piled up into the car. I don't remember much of the car ride, but I do remember watching my best friend leave. We had dropped Karina off first, and Martine and Jeremy were next. As we pulled into Jeremy's driveway, I saw his dad standing there in their garage talking to someone, already packed and ready to go. A sudden rush of anger went over me for the man in front of me, but I stayed silent until I got out of the car. I was the last to hug him, and I held him tight. I did not want to let go of him because I knew the second I did, the day would be over and he would leave. A part of me thought maybe if I held on a little longer, maybe if I squeezed a little tighter, things would go back to the way they were only a few years ago. I couldn't muster up enough strength to talk in a normal voice, so I simply whispered, "Goodbye, Jeremy," and watched as he walked up his driveway, into his house, and out of our lives. So I guess now you know the most dramatic thing in my life recently. I chose to write about this experience ahead of others because of the simple fact that, above other things, this experience meant the most to me. Until that day, I had never really lost a friend, never really lost anything the way I had lost Jeremy. And as much as I do realize that we still talk, and will most likely see him again someday, it's not the same as it would have been if he was still here, in Ohio, where he belongs.